Hey guys, today we are doing the follow-up video for Getting Lost number 3, Two Birds, One Window. If you have not already seen that video, I definitely recommend that you do that now by clicking the link right up here. Otherwise, this video will probably sound like a bunch of nonsense. Before diving in though, there is something else I wanted to take the opportunity to address regarding something that I shared in my very first follow-up video in this subseries. In that video, I shared my thoughts on what happened to Ben's childhood friend Annie, and while doing so, I explained my interpretation of the painting that we see displayed prominently in Ben's house as depicting Annie. However, a commenter by the name of Ben Ward recently pointed out to me that you can actually see that painting in Ben's flashbacks in The Man Behind the Curtain when he's just a child. And that, of course, definitively rules out what I, liked to believe the picture was depicting. Its presence in Ben's childhood home within the barracks indicates that it is actually depicting his mother. I was originally resistant to this idea for a couple of reasons. The first one was because I hadn't realized it was in Ben's childhood home. So I thought that Ben would have commissioned the painting or had painted it himself maybe. Not that we ever see him demonstrate that skill set or hobby. But yeah, I just thought it was kind of weird that he would have a painting done of his mom who he never even knew and then displayed it in his living room. That struck me as odd. Of course, now that I realize it was in his childhood home, that would indicate it wasn't Ben that painted it or had it painted. Which brings me to the second reason that I didn't really think it was the mom, because it also didn't seem within character, in my opinion, for Roger to have a painting drawn up of her. He just doesn't really strike me as that type of sentimental, I guess. That said, that's just my subjective interpretation of him. He's a human being with, complex layers. So I by no means am saying that it's a plot hole that he would have that. Also, there are potentially other explanations, such as maybe Ben's mom, Emily, was a painter herself, and maybe she painted a self-portrait while she was pregnant with Ben. Maybe that's what the little fragile gerbil-like creature represents, is Ben as a fetus. So yeah, maybe she painted it, and then when she died, Roger held on to it. That I would find a little bit easier for me to swallow as far as my views on Roger as a character. The point is, as much as I liked the idea of the painting being Annie, this is clearly not the case, and I wanted to set the record straight on that. As I've said before, everything that I share as far as theories and interpretations, I try to support it with evidence, and at the very least, I don't want there to be any evidence that outright contradicts it. And in this case, there absolutely is evidence that contradicts it. And thank you, Ben, for pointing that out. Now, with all of that said, and acknowledging that the painting does not depict Annie, I do still think everything that I said about what happened to her, I do still hold that as my personal headcanon. Obviously, the painting was just a nice extra piece to that. The theory of what happened to Annie didn't rely on that painting to be true. So yeah, I still think that is the most compelling case for what happened to her. I just needed to set the record straight that I was wrong in thinking that the painting could represent her. Okay, with that out of the way, let's dive into Two Birds, One Window. All of this is to say, this just might be the most divisive theory I personally subscribe to. Or so I thought at the time. I actually, a year later, I think I was wrong about that in a couple of ways. The first being that all of the comments on this video were actually very supportive. Even the couple of people that, expressed they didn't subscribe to the theory. They were very polite about it. They didn't at all seem to think it was inflammatory for me to suggest such a thing. It in no way, this video didn't in any way seem to be controversial. So I think I was wrong on that front. But I've also come to realize that my most recent Getting Lost video, which was about the date of the purge, that apparently is a much more divisive thing to get into than, you know, whether or not Matthew Abaddon was Walt. But I think what I say next is worth remembering when watching any of my videos.
So if you happen to be one of the people that doesn't like it, that is perfectly okay. All I ask is that you hear me out. Keep an open mind to the end of the video. Let me make the case and present the evidence, and if by the end of the video you are still not on board, the good news is this is just my own personal theory and interpretation.
So I don't know if anybody has noticed this or not, but the title card here says 2 birds, 1 theory. When I was writing and filming and editing this video, I went back and forth for quite a while on what I wanted to name the episode. And my first one was 2 birds, 1 window, for the obvious reason of, you know, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. But in the context of Lost and with Walt specifically, there are, you know, a number of occasions where a bird will fly into a window and die. So I thought that was kind of like a cool little hint as to where the video was going to go. But then once I was editing it, like I second guessed that decision because I thought maybe it would make it too obvious where I was going with it. And I didn't want people to think, oh, he's going to say it's Walt. I've, you know, heard, you know, whatever version of that theory. I don't want to bother watching this video. So I decided to instead name it 2 birds, 1 theory. And that's why the title card says that. And then several months later, I decided to change it back to 2 birds, 1 window, because I just think that's the better title. I think I was being a little paranoid in thinking that A, people would realize that's what I was referring to, and B, that people would actually be discouraged by that if they did realize what I was alluding to. So yeah, I decided to switch the official name of the video back to 2 birds, 1 window, but there's nothing I can do as far as the title card, which is why it still says 2 birds, 1 theory. I'm sure nobody watching this actually cares about this at all, so sorry.
What makes Matthew Abaddon so special that he would be trusted with such important and unique tasks?
See what I did there?
Unless it was right under our nose the whole time.
All right, so here I wanted to get into the comment from Lethologica02. They start by saying, while I don't personally agree with this theory, I loved the Saw-inspired twist reveal and word find on the board. I am a huge fan of the Saw series as well as Lost, and I got into both of them around the same time as they were both being released between 2004 and 2010. And I was a teenager at that time, and I remember always thinking it would be so cool to make a little Saw reveal twist sequence. So when I was brainstorming this video, I couldn't resist the opportunity to do that. But continuing on with their comment, there's obviously room for quibbles with this theory, such as why cast Lance Reddick to play future Walt when they look so different, given how good the show usually does with its casting of older and younger versions of particular characters. So this comment actually reminded me of a huge criticism of this theory that I remember hearing as far back as 2008 when I first became aware of the idea that, you know, maybe Matthew Abaddon was going to eventually be revealed to be Walt from the future. As I said in the intro to this video, I was immediately a fan of that idea, specifically because of the way it recontextualized the exchange between Matthew Abaddon and Locke in Locke's flashback. To me, it made a lot of sense, the way Matthew Abaddon was speaking to him, that, yeah, he would be Walt from the future. But there were a lot of people that didn't like that idea, and I remember one of the criticisms being, oh, because they're both black, you assume they have to be the same person. While this is a potentially valid criticism, I think that there is a lot more to it than that, as hopefully my video demonstrated. And as far as their physical appearance, I don't, it's not that superficial to me. It's not just their skin color. When you look at these pictures side by side, I think there are quite a few similarities between them. Obviously, they're both African-American males, but they also have very similar eyes. Their noses are similar, which honestly is the thing that that's what makes me think it's pretty solid casting. They're also both tall. As far as their differences, Reddick's ears are slightly bigger and his lips are slightly smaller, but no casting of two different actors playing the same character at different ages is ever a 100% match. The hair's not really a factor, as we really have no way of knowing if Walt would eventually naturally go bald. Or, and I actually like this idea a lot better, maybe he shaves his head as a style choice, perhaps even taking after a certain mentor from his childhood, that being Locke. Ultimately, it's just a matter of personal opinion if you think the casting of these two actors lines up enough for this to be believable or, convincing. I personally do, but if it doesn't hit that bar for you, I certainly don't blame you. Going back to Lethologica 02's comment, they also had another potential counterpoint to the idea of Abaddon being Walt, and that was asking the question of why ask Hurley if the Oceanic survivors were still alive when he visits Hurley in the mental hospital. And my take on that is that when Matthew shows up to Hurley, he is genuinely checking up on him. He's looking out for his old friend. But once Hurley became afraid and dismissive of Matthew, I think Abaddon asked about the other survivors in an effort to help fuel the guilt that Hurley was already feeling, thinking that would help prod him along back to the island where he needed to end up. And to be honest, that explanation for Matthew's visit, that he genuinely wanted to check up on Hurley, and then, when that didn't really work out, kind of trying to push him, towards going back to the island, that explanation makes more sense than any I can come up with for why Widmore would have sent Abaddon to visit Hurley. It doesn't make sense for Widmore to have him go there and ask that question, because Widmore knows full well that they're still alive, that the people that were left on the island, obviously weren't at the bottom of the sea. And yeah, based on the fact that he met the time travelers, he knows that they were still alive when they were left behind. He knows that, and he frankly doesn't particularly care. So why he would then send Matthew out of his way to go visit Hurley and ask that question, I haven't been able to come up with a reason that makes sense to me. I know some people have said that they think at this point Jacob has visited Charles, and so at this point he's interested in protecting the candidates. And I really don't want to get into all of that. For now, I'll just say that I do not think this is the case, and I do have quite a few compelling reasons for not believing that to be the case, and I am saving those for my video on Charles Widmore, which is coming, I promise. That's probably my most foreshadowed video at this point. There are countless comments on many of my YouTube videos that bring up Charles Widmore and why he went to the island in the last season and what he was doing and all that stuff. And every time that I respond to one of these comments, I have to be like, I'm going to get into that eventually, but I want to save it for the video because there's a lot to go over with that. The example I use is this video. If I just came out and said, like if this video started and I just came out and said, hey, Matthew Abaddon's Walt from the future, it just sounds crazy without presenting all of the evidence first. And that's kind of the same thing for my thoughts on Charles Widmore and his motivations. If I just came out and said it to you in a sentence, similar to Matthew Abaddon as Walt from the future. I think a lot of people, if not most people, would be like, okay, this guy just lost me. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But if I present it in video format, I go over all the facts the way I did with this video, I think a lot more people will be more receptive to the idea. Even if they don't ultimately agree with it, I think they'll realize there is a lot more merit to the idea than it might initially seem on the surface. Anyways, trying to keep my tangents to a minimum this time, so let's continue on.
Now, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to briefly do something I generally prefer not to do. And that is talk about real-world, behind-the-scenes details that affected the show.
So this seems like a perfect opportunity to address something that's been coming up in a few different places more recently. And yeah, that is, why do I say that I generally prefer not to bring up things that happened outside of the show? The behind the scenes reasons for things happening. What I'm aiming to do with these videos, the thing that I'm interested in doing is giving in-universe explanations for the things that we see happen on screen. If people watch Lost and, have certain questions about things or are trying to make sense of certain things, I think it is more fun, more interesting, more satisfying to come up with those explanations based on what happens in the show. And because of that, I feel that any theory or interpretation or explanation that I give should rely specifically on evidence within the show and not without. Even when it comes to things that the writers and showrunners have said about their intentions, or, this definitely was the case in this situation. Even though, I generally wouldn't argue with them, there are several examples where they have contradicted themselves, where in one interview or commentary or podcast episode, behind the scenes special feature, thing, they'll say one thing like, oh, this is what was going on here. And then elsewhere, you can find another example of them saying something that contradicts that very thing. Now, that's not an attack on them. They are human beings, and as the show was airing, the story was still evolving. So certain things that were the intention later may not have been. And in more recent interviews, they're really good about acknowledging that their memory is fallible. Regardless of the reasons for there being these contradictory statements, my point is that I am very, very hesitant to ever point to something they have said to support my argument. Because in a lot of cases, someone else could then go find something else those same people said and be like, well, see here, they said the opposite thing. Which is why I prefer to rely on the evidence in the context of the story. And that does sometimes mean that I subscribe to a theory or interpretation that differs from something that the showrunners have said in the past. I feel that I can safely say that is generally not the case, but there are a few scenarios where it is. I'm trying to think if I want to give you guys an example without going into, the specifics that I would like to save for a future video. I guess maybe I could use the example of Harper appearing to Juliet. I believe it was Rachel 23 or Rochelle 23. I'm sorry, I'm not sure which way it's pronounced. But I believe she was the one that recently pointed out that the showrunners have said that Harper appearing to Juliet in the season 4 episode, The Other Woman. The showrunners said in a podcast episode that this was actually Harper. But this is not my interpretation. Based on the context of the story and the evidence that exists in the story, and the things that make more sense than that actually being Harper, I do not subscribe to what they have said as being the interpretation of that scene. Now, again, maybe their original intention when they wrote that scene and filmed it was that that was the actual Harper, and eventually we were going to get to know her more and come to understand why she appeared to Juliet and how she communicated with Ben, if it really was Ben that sent her, etc. But the fact that we never got that and we never actually see Harper again, I do think there are alternatives to that being Harper Stanhope that make more sense, that fit within the context of the completed story that now exists. Now, I'll wait to dive into all of that for the eventual video on that topic. But for now, I thought that that would serve as the least tantalizing example of one of the few times where I would contradict the showrunners and storytellers themselves, or specifically something that they've said in the past. But yeah, aside from the contradictory statements that sometimes exist, outside of the show, the other reason that I prefer to focus on in-universe explanations is my interest is much more rooted in the story. The story is what invites us to find meaning and, engage in these fascinating conversations about, what things mean to us and what we relate to and what our interpretations of things are based on, who we are as people and our own life experience, etc. The example that I used recently is like, if somebody asked me why Echo was killed, there's the real world answer, which is that the actor that played him didn't want to be on the show anymore. He didn't like living in Hawaii. He wanted to go back home. So he asked to be written out of the show. So if somebody asked me why Echo was killed in Lost, I could give them that answer. And that is the right answer. That is a fact. That is what happened. But I don't think that's the question most people are asking when they ask that. They're wondering, why did the smoke monster kill Echo? And that they're looking for an explanation inside the story. They want it to make sense inside the story. And that's what the goal of these videos are. I'm never trying to say this is what the writers definitely intended, or they definitely didn't intend this. I'm never trying to say that. These videos. Somebody criticized my videos recently, or my channel recently, saying that something along the lines of my videos are more interested in theory crafting and headcanon, and I thought that was weird that they thought that that was a criticism. It literally says in the title card of every one of my videos, a theory and explanation video. So yes, these videos are literally theory crafting. But as I keep saying, I try to craft these theories using evidence, and I always do my absolute best, and so far I think I've done a pretty good job of not presenting a theory or an explanation that is outright wrong. That, you can point to something in the show, in the story, and be like, see, this is wrong. The Annie painting is a good example. I thankfully didn't put that into a theory and explanation video. That was more of, my ramblings in one of these follow-up videos. But yeah, that was a theory and interpretation I had that I shared, and it is wrong. It's one of those cases where it contradicts the facts. So it is not right, which is why I wanted to, take this opportunity to, correct that. Anyways, once again, the tangents. Yeah, I think I've explained myself thoroughly, if not clearly, on why I don't, why I generally prefer not to refer to things that happen behind the scenes or outside of the show. Now, what I do feel the need to explain is why I then do sometimes bring these things in, including in this video. And that is almost always because of the conversations I've had about these topics in the past, where people have then brought up these outside factors or interviews or what have you, as criticism of, the theory or explanation that I'm presenting. So in those cases, I feel the need to bring up those things in advance and then address them in the context of the video that I'm making. A good quick example would be the pulling the trigger video, getting lost number 13. I, at the end of that video, bring up the enhanced episodes because when I have discussed with people the idea of whether or not Widmore actually had Nadia killed, I always have said I don't think that's at all likely. It doesn't make sense. There's a much more reasonable explanation for why Saeed thinks that and what actually happened. And one of the responses I've had many times in that type of conversation is that, well, the enhanced episode for the season 5 finale confirmed that it was Widmore's man that hit Nadia. And so while I would prefer not to even bring that up in one of my videos because, in my mind, that's a behind the scenes type of thing that isn't worth addressing with what I'm trying to do. But because that's the thing that people point to contradict what I'm suggesting, I then feel the need to get out in front of it and address it. Like, hey, actually, the writers have said they're not even the ones that wrote that. They don't even have time to check it to make sure that it's accurate. And yeah, actually, there's quite a few errors in these enhanced episodes. Some of the notations that they say are just factually wrong. But as for what I bring up in this video, as far as the behind-the-scenes stuff, why did I bring this up? Because one of the criticisms of the Matthew Abaddon, is Walt from the future. One of the criticisms of that idea is, why would the writers do that and then not reveal it? Why would they suddenly kill Matthew Abaddon off without explaining how he knew the things he knew and what his deal was? Because that is a common criticism of the theory, I felt the need to address it. I felt the need to point to certain things that make me think it is likely that was their original intention, though, I'm by no means saying that for a fact. But regardless, I'm explaining the behind-the-scenes reasons for why Matthew's fate was what it was, and then providing what I feel is a satisfying in-universe alternative to what his actual fate may have been, which is, again, based on existing evidence. It's not at all... It would not at all be out of character for the show Lost to show us a character that appears to be dead, but actually isn't.
Personally, I can totally buy that someone who is as special as Walt was as a kid could manage to survive those injuries by the time he's a fully grown man.
So speaking of Walt being special, that brings us to a comment by Jerry Badine. I think that's pronounced Jerry. I apologize if it isn't. And yeah, I think I've got about a 50-50 chance of pronouncing that last name right. Anyways, he says, maybe you can do a continuation talking about Walt being special. One quote comes to mind. Did Walt ever appear somewhere he wasn't supposed to be? He is, of course, referring to what Beatrice Klugh says to Michael in the Season 2 episode 3 Minutes, when he is brought to their decoy camp. She asks him that question. Obviously, they have some kind of interest in Walt, presumably due to his parapsychological abilities. So I feel like the more common interpretation of this question relates to astral projection. That is a parapsychological ability, and it is one that definitely seems to exist within the show, and one that Walt may or may not have demonstrated, depending on your interpretation of what Shannon sees. So the idea is that Beatrice is curious if throughout Walt's youth, when he was, living, in other places around the world with his mother, if he ever appeared through the ability of astral projection to Michael. And I do think this explanation for her asking that question does make sense. That is a good explanation for why she would ask that. That said, if you do subscribe to the theory that Abaddon is Walt, as I do, I think there is another fun possibility here, and that relates to the fact that Ben has clearly been off island since Widmore was exiled, and the fact that Miles has a photo of Ben from Ben being off island suggests that there was some kind of run-in that Ben had with Widmore off island, or at least with Widmore's people off island. And therefore, it's absolutely plausible that Ben may have met Matthew Abaddon in that time. And when you think about Beatrice's question, in the context of the Abaddon being Walt theory, it's interesting because Walt would then have spent much of his life being in two places at once, literally. So if Ben, when reading the files on the 815 survivors, the ones that he has Mikhail compile. If he were to come across something in Walt's file that makes him suspect that this could be, this mysterious man he's met, in the past that works for Widmore, that could be part of the reason that he was abducted. If they're trying to understand what that guy's motivations are, how he does the things he does, what he's actually capable of, it would make sense that they would want Walt to, study him and understand him. And maybe when she's asking Michael that question, she's probing to see if, future Walt, Matthew, ever visited Michael, and maybe even revealed himself to Michael, so that maybe they can gain information about Abaddon's goals and his knowledge of what's to come. I like that idea quite a bit, but obviously that is a lot of speculation, and you do already have the other perfectly sensible explanation for her question, and that being that they just want to see if he's capable of astral projection.
Together, they can help his father Michael and the other lost souls trapped on the island to move on.
Now, this is something where my thoughts have evolved a little bit. I have never liked the idea that Michael would be trapped indefinitely as a ghost on the island. One of my main reasons for not liking that idea is it undermines the idea that he redeemed himself in some way by saving the lives of Jen, Desmond, Lapidus, Jack, Kate, Aaron, Saeed, son. Don't know if I forgot anybody there, but the point is he saves all of their lives by staying behind and delaying that bomb from going off. That to me is meant to be a redemptive moment. But then in season 6, Michael shows up to Hurley, and the explanation he gives is that he's trapped on the island, and the Whispers are other people that are trapped on the island for doing terrible things. That doesn't sit right with me, and obviously a lot of that has to do with my personal beliefs on things, but I've just never liked that idea. And a user named Liam Scott actually brought this up. He actually had 2 questions, and I'll go back and address the first one here in a minute. But his second one was, why is Michael's, ghost on the island if he repaid his debt by being Ben's spy? So yeah, I don't think being Ben's spy specifically is what redeemed him. Obviously, Ben is not the best person, and his motives are not the best. And it is worth acknowledging that Michael largely just wants to die. And when Tom tells him that the only way he can die is by, fulfilling some purpose that the island demands of him, that is a large part of his motivation. It isn't. There is a large selfish component to his motivations. He isn't being entirely noble by going on this trip. Indeed, he shows a willingness to blow up the freighter full of innocent people just so that he can die. But where Michael's story does become redemptive in my eyes is when dying is no longer his sole or primary motivation. When they discover that C4 on the boat, Michael doesn't have to do anything. Like, he can just wait for it to explode. That's what he wants. He wants it to explode. But he is actively trying to prevent it from exploding while people he cares about are on the boat. And then, in the end, he sends Jen away, and he continues trying to stop it from going off for as long as possible. And I do kind of look at his death then as a reward of sorts, because he obviously didn't want to go on living with the guilt of what he did, and he had wanted to stop living with that guilt for a while now, and it was only after selflessly trying to save his friends that he got what he wanted. My point is that even though Michael did want to die, I do feel like he redeemed himself by saving the lives of all those people. So for him to be trapped potentially for eternity, but at least for quite a while, as a ghost on the island, it's profoundly unsatisfying to me, which is why I've never liked it. But I've also never liked it because there's a lot in that episode where he appears to Hurley as a ghost. There's a lot about that whole situation that doesn't make a lot of sense. He shows up supposedly warning Hurley about what they're about to do, which is go get dynamite and blow up the plane. He shows up and tells Hurley, hey, look, if you do that, you're gonna get a bunch of people killed, and it's gonna be on you because people are listening to you now, and you don't want that on your conscience. Now, we have no way of knowing if that would have been true or not. It's possible that, transporting the unstable dynamite over to this island, which is being guarded by Widmore's men, it's possible people would have gotten killed in that situation, absolutely. But for Michael to apparently know that for a fact indicates that death has somehow given him, some level of foresight. And yet, once Hurley tells him later in the episode that now, because he's listening to Michael, they're going to go see the Man in Black. Hey, Michael, do you know where the camp's at? And Michael just points it right out to him. This ghost, who supposedly has enough foresight to warn about the dangers of blowing up this plane, doesn't warn Hurley that, hey, going and doing what the Man in Black wants you to do is going to get a bunch of people killed, which it does. But before we're kind of speculating that the blowing up the plane, that trying to blow up the plane could result in people's deaths. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. We don't know. But we do know that going and joining the Man in Black and doing what he wants them to do definitely does get people killed. So why does Michael not warn them about that? It doesn't add up. And that has always been my other problem with, the reveal of Michael's fate, after his death. So what do I mean when I say that my thinking on this subject has evolved somewhat? What I mean is that in the past year since making this video, I have finally reached an interpretation that I feel completely satisfied with as far as what was actually going on with Michael in that whole situation. I hate to keep leaving you guys hanging like this, but I will be doing a video on that that will present the full case and all my arguments for why I think that there's a more satisfying explanation to that. But what I will say now, as it does pertain to this video, is that I don't think that Walt was being brought back to the island to help his father move on. The exact exchange between Ben and Walt regarding Michael is this.
We need you. You have work to do. Starting with helping your father.
My father's dead.
Doesn't mean you can't help him.
We, the audience, have for a long time, and at least for the most part, have interpreted that to mean, because of what we saw in season 6, we've interpreted that to mean that Walt is going to somehow help his father move on. But there's nothing about Ben's phrasing that actually explicitly says this is the case. And because I subscribe to this theory about Matthew Abaddon, I do think there is another explanation for what Ben means, and that is this. If Hurley and Ben are sending Walt back in time to fulfill his role as Matthew Abaddon, whose role in the chain of events was vital to making sure the end results were what they were, then one of the things that Walt is going to end up accomplishing for them is assembling the freighter crew. We see that he had a role in this in the season 2 episode Confirmed Dead.
Every member of this team was selected for a specific purpose.
But what I think is an interesting implication about this is that he very well may have had a role in approving the application of Kevin Johnson, aka his father Michael. And in doing so, he would have played a vital role in giving Michael that opportunity to redeem himself. So when Ben shows up, and he even says this line that I love,
I can't change the past. I can only take responsibility for it.
I think he is offering Walt the opportunity to help his father by giving him that chance to redeem himself. So when Walt says, my father's dead, that is true. That is objectively true. He's been dead for years, from where they're at in time. But in this world where time travel exists, just because Michael's dead doesn't mean that Walt can't still play an active role in helping him. Now, Liam Scott's other question was, why did Michael shoot Ana Lucia and Libby? You can say he's just a bad person, etc., but more to the point, why did he think he had to instead of just getting them to leave or getting Ana Lucia to leave? So I will probably touch on this in my video about Ben and what his plan was in the back half of season 2. But yeah, this is a fairly quick thing to address. So we know that Michael was given the very difficult task of setting Henry Gale free and then bringing 4 of his friends, and only those 4, back to the others. So in order to accomplish the second goal, he has to somehow find a way to accomplish the first one without arousing suspicion. If he sets Henry free, but his friends know that he set Henry free, then they're not going to listen to him. Like, if they end up going at all, it'll be with as many people as they can get to come along. So yeah, he somehow got to find the best opportunity he can to get Henry out of there and not be discovered as a traitor. So when he wakes up and finds that it's only him and Ana Lucia in the hatch, generally there's at least 2 people in the hatch at a time because of the button. They're rotating these shifts where there's always 2 people on duty. Michael obviously knows this from when he briefly returned to the camp. And at this point, with them having a prisoner in the hatch, there's probably more than 2 people in there most of the time at this point. So him waking up and finding that he only has Ana Lucia to worry about, all things considered, this is as good of an opportunity as he's ever going to get to set Henry free. And she has a gun. She has a loaded gun with her. So yeah, in his desperation to get his son back and to accomplish the things that he needs to accomplish, I think killing just Ana Lucia, that was the best case scenario for how he was ever going to accomplish that. So he does it. And then unfortunately, what he didn't know was that Libby had come to get the blankets, and, she surprises him, and obviously he shoots her too. And as Hurley confronts him about later, even if he had had time to think, he would have made the same decision with her that he had already made with Ana Lucia. But the point is that when he makes the decision to kill Ana Lucia, he thinks he's only going to have to kill the one person. And that was almost certainly the most ideal situation he could hope for at that point. But okay, I think that's everything. My next theory video after Two Birds, One Window was By the Numbers. And I'll talk more about that in the follow-up video. But yeah, I don't love... That's my least favorite video of mine. And yeah, I'll go into why. It's my hope that the follow-up video will redeem it somewhat. But yeah, that came out on May 10th of last year. So May 10th of this year is the goal for the follow-up video. If you haven't seen that theory video, you can click right up here. But this is really the one case where I don't feel like you need to. He said it's the one video that I would go back and delete if, he didn't then leave that gap. Regardless, the relevant information in that video, I'll be going over in the follow-up. So yeah, in this one particular case, you don't need to watch the other one to watch the follow-up. And then yeah, Getting Lost number 15. I don't want to make any promises, but I'm thinking I'll make that one the one about Ben, and what his plan was in season 2 when he gets captured as Henry Gale, what it is he wanted to have happen, and etc. I'm thinking I'll make that the topic of 15, but that's going to be a really long one, and I have some other stuff planned for May that isn't related to Lost. But yeah, that probably means that Getting Lost number 15 will be towards the end of May, and it may mean that I need to make it a shorter topic than that one. But May should also have the follow-up video for Getting Lost number 5, Underworld. So regardless, there should still be 3 Lost-related videos in May. But yeah, I hope to see you guys next time.
Oh, hello there. If you're like me, you can't get enough of Lost. So if you'd like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive, just click right up here to subscribe. In the meantime, if you'd like to check out other videos like this one, just click right up here. Or, if you'd like to check out a fun talk show filmed in an abandoned Dharma broadcast station, just click right over here. And as always, remember that this channel is like the island. It wants you to come back.